we are resetting, and a reset is a restructuring. So, okay, if the biggest tool you have, for example, the central banks, the biggest tool that they have in keeping this game going are interest rates, because for the last 40 years, you lower interest rates, that inspires people to take on more debt. That's where all the money comes from, is the debt. That's why it does matter. The balance sheets do matter. But if we are anchored, and we've got what, something like 95%, don't hold me to this, but it's something like 95% of the industrial world is anchored at zero. And there's about $17 trillion worth of negative rate debt out there. That means you're paying somebody to borrow. So if you don't have your biggest tool to work with, you have to come up with something else. And that means that you have to create a whole new system. Does that make sense? And that's what the reset is. Okay. So if you read, I mean, the first time that I became completely aware of this agenda was in 2009 with Christine Lagarde. I 100% knew that the financial crisis that became apparent to everybody in 2008 was when the old system actually died and was then put on life support, with all of this money printing taking on more debt. I just looked at this yesterday. In the US, the public debt, so we're not talking about all of the debt, just the public debt to GDP is 143%. Now, the more debt you have, the more debt you have to service. So they cannot raise interest rates, because even at zero, that debt is virtually impossible to service. And we know that. So when Powell says, well, don't be conservative now is the time to spend, which is what he's doing, and we'll deal with that later. Well, that's the same kind of talk we heard in 2008. And what happened when he attempted to deal with it, to reduce that balance sheet and create some leverage to lower rates again? So when he was raising the rates, well, the markets didn't like it, because all of that debt money that they're creating is really like financial heroin or morphine or whatever you want to call it. But it's very, very, very addictive. So when I'm talking about a reset, fortunately, or unfortunately, I mean, now it is absolutely out there and open. You have the World Economic Forum, whose title for their next big conference is the Reset. And they're talking about, the Great Reset. And you have the ISDA, the head of the ISDA, which is a, it's all the bankers that create this garbage that get to determine what's a default, but they're the guys that are managing. Are you ready? If you don't know this number, 600, it's probably higher than this now. So this was August of 2019 were the most current numbers I could get on this. 640 trillion in notional value derivatives. Nobody knows what the underlying value at risk is, but all of those contracts, or well, maybe not all of them, but most of those contracts are tied to a benchmark, the LIBOR, that is going away the end of 2021. And all of those contracts have to be reset or restructured against the new benchmark that they've been trying to create, not just the US, but the Bank of England and the bank and the Swiss central bank, et cetera. There's a number of central banks that have been trying to create this new they've created the new benchmark, but created this new market around it. It has not been successful. And interestingly enough, when the coronavirus hit, and we saw the central bank, the Fed, issue massive amounts of debt, I thought to myself, Well, they have not been successful in getting participants in this new benchmark. This will be the opportunity to actually do that. And instead, in the Main Street lending program, the fallback was still the LIBOR. Now, there probably was language in those contracts that enabled them to change it from LIBOR to the US's, which is SOFR. But it was a huge opportunity to really establish that market, and they did not do it. So you ask yourself, why didn't they take advantage of that? And the answer is because they're not ready. So in Europe, they did a small test of derivative contracts, and they paid the entities that were losing money, they paid them to make up for that loss. So there didn't need to be fire sales. And in mid-October, they did a bigger test here, 80 trillion over the weekend. It was after October 15th. So I think the 16th, 17th. Wow. I cannot find one thing on the results of that auction and that transfer.
Wow.
And that scares me more than if they admitted to having some problems that they knew they had to overcome. So, you know, does the debt and the deficits matter? Is this not the time to be conservative? As an individual, this is 100% the time to be very, very, very conservative, in my opinion. And when you say, what do we need to do? We need to become as independent and self-sufficient as possible, because we got a little taste of what happens in March and April, and we're going to experience that on steroids. So that means food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because regardless of what's happening in the economy, everything's great. You still need those things. Everything is crappy. You still need those things. You need them even more. You need that community even more, which is what this is between you and I. Well, I know you agree. I know you believe in physical gold and silver.
Oh, yeah.
But with
I not only believe in it, I own it.
Exactly. And I own it too. So yeah, I know you do. But going into this surveillance economy even more makes having that piece that is 100% out of the system that much more important. Yeah. Because that's universal. That's universal wealth.